everyone. Thanks for joining us for our webcast today. I'm Megan Carey, the Marketing Event Manager here at Netshurian. And today's webcast is, do you even threat hunt, bro? We're going to be diving into how to step up your threat hunting process without overwhelming your security teams. In today's presentation, it's going to be led by Ananth, Netshurian's Chief Strategy Officer. He's going to take us through the journey and basics of threat hunting, including the differences between the types of threat hunting, challenges that security teams and organizations often face with developing a threat hunting strategy, how to overcome those challenges, and move toward achieving threat hunting maturity and creating a tailored strategy. And now I'm going to pass it off to Ananth, who will dive into threat hunting. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Megan. Good day to you all, folks. A very interesting topic, one that's near and dear to our hearts, threat hunting. Brought on by the non-stop evil that you see in the world out there. So let's get right into it. By the way, if you have questions during the broadcast, I'm happy to take them. The chat window is there. We will have time toward the end, a dedicated block for Q&A. So if you prefer to hold it till then, that's fine too. But there's no real reason to. Interactive is cool. So let's get some basic definitions out of the way. When we say threat hunting, and we're referring to threats in the IT or in the network from an IT security standpoint, what exactly is the hunting of such threats mean? Well, it's a process, and it is iterative, and it's usually proactive, though not always. The iterative part is important because you sort of have to do this over and over again. And what are you doing? You're searching through the data that is accumulated from your network, endpoints, SaaS applications, firewalls, network devices, that kind of thing. And the objective is to find these threats that are going to evade your existing security solution. I mean, there's nobody out there that hasn't already implemented something meaningful by way of a firewall, some kind of endpoint protection, even if it's antivirus. And so therefore, these solutions will try their best to block or prevent. But stuff is going to get by. It's only a question of when. And so the act of hunting is the act of identifying these kinds of threats. We call them advanced threats because all the TD stuff's been stopped already. And the idea is to catch these kinds of threats that those other security controls that you have in place might have missed. Some of this can be done through the assistance of the machine. In fact, you must these days because the volume of data coming is so insanely high that you have to have these sorts of techniques around. It also is manual. There are cases where the human must be involved, and expert human really, because not everything can be done. I mean, we like to think that AI is there, but really, frankly, it can't even detect a cat appropriately sometimes, whereas a human can do that extremely well. And so manual is necessary. So that's what we think of as the definition of threat hunting. Different types of threat hunting, as I mentioned, there are two kinds. The first kind, you sort of get a clue. You're sitting at the control room, the sensor goes off, and you can now go upstairs to see why the sensor was tripped. Maybe it's just a cat, in which case you shoo the cat away, reset the sensor, and try and figure out how a cat got in. Or maybe it's Catwoman and she's after the jewels, in which case your response will be very different. Maybe you're going to send up the bat signal and you're going to call the police and you're going to try your best to get her, though the movies will have you believe that it's too late anyway. But the hunt is being triggered in this case by an alert or an alarm. Something has spooked you, and it can be a news story. We saw that, for example, with Log4j. Many people woke up only to realize that Log4j is out and about, and bad guys are trying it, left and right. The same was true of Hafnium. The same was true of the SolarWinds case. It can also be because of an internal observation. Someone says to you, I see that John was working at his desk on Saturday. He never ever does that. What's that about? And you feel like figuring out what was he doing on Saturday? What other machines did he log into? Who else was in there? And so it can be triggered by an internal observation. What are you doing? Well, you're focusing on investigating the root cause. What happened and why did this actually come to pass. Often this is known, meaning you know that this can happen, and you know that this kind of thing can happen, and you know that it did happen. Right? And so this is the known. If you believe Don Rumsfeld, the architect, the defense secretary back in the George W. Bush time, he talked about three kinds of threats: known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns, with the third one being the most difficult one to catch. You're not sure that what the type of threat is, and you're not even sure that it is occurring. In the second case, you'll know it if you see it, but you don't know if it's actually occurring. Another kind of threat hunting is not one that is triggered much by a specific observation or specific news, but it can be triggered by a distressing trend. You suddenly see that the number of attacks on your website, or the number of scans on your external firewall, or the number of login failures in your enterprise has gone above whatever you consider to be normal. Right? Maybe normal for you on a Monday is 10 an hour, and now you're seeing 15 or 30 or 100 an hour. Maybe normal over the weekend is 0, and you're now seeing 8 an hour. And so an anomaly. And so that can trigger your hunting. Can either be the first time seen, hey, look, I see John logging in to the database server at the data center, but John really is in the shipping department, and he never, ever logged into that server before. What's that about? Or it could be out of ordinary that I described. In these cases, because the trigger may or may not show up, why then you must do this periodically. You see this all the time, where it's 9 o'clock, it's time to hunt. You're going to go out there like Rambo, knife between your teeth, and you're looking for whatever it is that doesn't feel right, sit right with you, and you have something in the back of your neck that tells you when something doesn't feel right. That requires, of course, an expert, but it's a different kind of threat hunting. There is a loop. You want to hunt, bro? You got to go through this loop. The first step is to have a hypothesis. I think thus and such is going on in the network. I wonder if we're being attacked on the external firewall. Okay, in which case you can perform an analysis and see, do I see any evidence that that hypothesis is really true? Maybe it is. Okay, in which case it's time to get deep. If you don't see any evidence of it, you can dismiss it right then and there. But if you see some evidence and you're not sure, why then you must go further on this. Deep dive. Document what is it that you found, and then think about how you can convert this through automation, because you really want to do that as much as you. Alrighty. So then a question that I get asked often is, I get people claiming that they threat hunt. How do I select between provider A and provider B? Because if I listen to their marketing material, they all seem to say the sort of the same things, and I can't really sort. Or I've implemented a hunting team on my side. How do I know that I'm getting better? Well, there is a maturity model promoted by the SANS Institute that we think is useful. This is called the hunting maturity model, or the HMM, and it's patterned after the capability and maturity model, the CMM, which is something that has existed for a long time. How do you tell if you're getting better, yay or nay? Let's try. So at level 0, your roles, you rely primarily on automated alerting. You're not really collecting a whole lot of data. If this is your situation, then you're in the very early stages of threat hunting. You want to get better. Yeah, okay, now you're collecting data from more sources, and you're incorporating some amount of threat intelligence to try and identify if anything that's happening in your network matches what's known evil. Want to get fancier than that? You got to be procedural. Now you follow the procedures. Your hunt follows a process, and you're collecting data from everywhere pretty much that you can. Want to get fancier than that? You're innovative now. You're not just following procedures that someone else made, maybe the SANS Institute, maybe someone else, but you're actually creating new data analysis procedures based on your observation, your expertise, your particular environment. And then the fanciest of all, automation is heavy. In all of these cases, you've got a large amount of data collection, of course, to begin with. So a eye chart, if you want to compare these hunting maturity models with the threat hunting loop steps, you saw the 5 steps, right? You have to collect data. You have to form a hypothesis. You got to test that hypothesis. You got to look for patterns. And then you have to think about automation. So this eye chart, and I'm not going to read it out for you. It's available in the slides, and you'll get a copy of it. This would be a way for you to judge where you are in maturity. Or if you're acquiring this from a provider, you could ask them to describe their services, to you in the context of this, and thereby you can compare provider A versus provider B and decide what's good enough for you. By the way, good enough is an important word. Frequently, we're driven to buy something that's on the top right of the quadrant, the best of the best. But you have to do really a needs analysis and a benefit analysis. Sometimes it's not worth buying the best of the best simply because the crown jewels that you're protecting aren't maybe necessarily worth that kind of expense. I mean, where would you keep the crown jewels anyway? You'd keep them in the Tower of London. Where would you keep loose change? You'd keep it in the side drawer. So if you haven't thought about what is your exposure and how much risk are you subject to, then you won't know how much effort, how much money, how much budget to expend. And so that's one of the first steps to do. And just because somebody can get to, HMM level 4 doesn't follow automatically that they're a best fit for you. Depends on your situation, frankly. So moving right along. By the way, I'll remind you, if you have questions, I am happy to take them at any point. So why is this hard? Well, the first thing that we see that is a challenge is lack of data and visibility. Where exactly are your assets? These days, because of the pandemic, because of work from home, turns out that any enterprise probably has a bunch of stuff still at the office, on-prem. Some stuff has moved to the cloud. Some stuff is sitting in SaaS solutions like Microsoft 365 or the Google Workspace. Some stuff might actually be at home in the work from home environment. Some stuff might have migrated to AWS or Azure or Google Cloud, some sort of public cloud. Are you in a position to actually get all of that data? In other words, do you have visibility? How do you catch what you can't see? So one obstacle to threat hunting is that often you kind of fail at the first step. You don't have the right sources, and from those sources, you don't have the right kinds of data. This is a lot harder than it seems in this simple slide. Second obstacle, you got something, but you got nobody that really understands how all of this works in the real world from an attacker's perspective, because these kinds of people are quite difficult to catch and to retain. Right? We do that for a living ourselves, but I can tell you that they are not plentiful on the ground, and the shortage is global. So no matter which part of the world you are in, security staff difficult to find. If you do hire somebody from the outside, how well do they know your network, your particular situation? Melding an outside team to an inside network takes time, because while they might be expert in the threat landscape, you are expert in your particular network. And so somehow those two have to match up. And sometimes when they don't, they're raising things that are really not an issue for you. So that's another obstacle. Last but not the least, as I described to you, there are different kinds of maturity levels for threat hunting. Just because you got a threat hunting service doesn't mean it matches your need. So that is something to consider. So these are obstacles to effective threat hunting. I wanted to take some time because a number of folks on this webinar are customers of ours. And I wanted to explain how is it that we, NetSurian, actually perform hunting. So first of all, we bring to the table our open XDR platform. That's the one that you see on the right. And we've evolved. We used to be many years ago just a plain old SIM. It was called Event Tracker. And so we would receive log data, and then we would be able to ingest it and incorporate it. But in today's network, that's really not enough, simply because I described your network to you, right? I mean, you have stuff in M365 or in Google Workspace, in AWS or Azure, you have it on-prem, you have it at home, you have it from the network, you have it from the platform. So simply doing a SIM, not good enough. You need to think about traffic as well. That's the middle bucket. And then, of course, the endpoint, because by now you've implemented something meaningful at the endpoint. If you've gotten away from plain old antivirus, and at a minimum, you probably have Windows Defender, which is the Microsoft built-in solution in Windows 10 and 11 if you happen to use their platform. Or maybe you've incorporated something like Sentinel-1 or CrowdStrike or Carbon Black as as a solution, simply because that has such a hot and heavy vector. Right? There's so many endpoints. They're usually run by people that are not super security technical. Therefore, they're susceptible to phishing attacks, social attacks, and that becomes a favorite target of people everywhere, of all of the attackers. Oh, by the way, they're connected broadband to the internet 24/7. And so that's a very popular attack vector. So possibly you've tried to do something around EDR. You want to look at all of this, because threat hunting is not limited to just the network or just the endpoint, or just your authentication or just your public cloud or just your SaaS applications. It's all of those things. So the first thing that Netsurian does is bring you a single unified platform with integrated capability so that you can look at it and remove all of these blind spots. So that's the first thing in terms of hunting. Second, it's technology, all right, and that's really the heart of it. And so the old event tracker SIM still in the picture, network analytics. If you already have made an investment in EDR, we're happy to take that data. If you have not, we will bring a solution to the table that is based on deep learning. And incorporate that into our service. Of course, user entity and behavior analysis married to machine learning, part of the platform, and then a robust source of threat intelligence. What's going on in the world today? All of this technology is incorporated in the Netsurian Open XDR platform. Add to that, a detection library that's being updated every day, a response library. If you see something, don't just say something, do something. And then the ability to actually analyze that automatically. Also available from Netsurian is a vulnerability scan solution. If you're already doing it somehow, great. We want those results so that we can incorporate them. If you're not and you're tired of it, or you're tired of it, that is something that our solution can actually offer. Okay, so now you've got technology. You're collecting data from all of the sources. That one of the main obstacles. Great. Are you properly sorted in terms of process? Because that's the second piece. You got technology. Now you got to have processes for handling false positives. The technology is going to throw up stuff that isn't true, right? You know how to dismiss false positives and make sure you tune that stuff. Do you have a playbook for incident response? So that when something happens and you say do something, you know what that do something is? This is your practicing for the fire drill, right? But the fire drill goes off. If you've drilled, the fire alarm goes off, I should say. If you've drilled, why then you know where to congregate, how to evacuate, who's in charge of the floor and all of that. If you haven't, then everyone's running around panic, wondering what to do now. That's what the playbooks are for. And of course, for the infrastructure, because all of this stuff comes and sits somewhere, is the infrastructure operating correctly? What if it isn't? How can you correct it and make it optimum? Forensics, what happened after the attack? Go back and look. And then, of course, we talked about threat intel. We're very fond of getting it. You know that it also has to be aged out, because some of the threats you don't need to worry about anymore, because either the endpoint solution is already updated, or it's become old and it's out of fashion, or the operating systems have been patched such that it's not even really an issue. So managing those feeds, not just adding to them, but also properly managing them is a thing. And I mentioned vulnerability management. Last but not the least, so it's technology, process, and people. We bring to the table people that will triage alerts, escalate them to the investigator, escalate them. You've seen something. Okay, now don't just say something, do something, the response, and what happens such that we can learn the lessons, manage the threat content, operate 24/7, talk to the customer, understand what their requirements are, what their needs are, explain what is it that has happened in proper detail, and some other housekeeping things like getting on board new customers, and then training. I mean, it's like SEAL Team 6, right? They spend an inordinate amount of time training. In fact, sometimes more time training than they do on mission. Well, we're not quite that bad, but because the nature of the threat landscape changes, our capability changes, training is an inevitable thing and must be done on a continuing basis. So what do we bring to the table with the platform? First of all, data collection. If you can't see it, you probably won't find it. No log left behind is our slogan for a long time. Pretty much any data source you got, any format you got, we've been at this for a long time. And then different sorts of tools to help the analyst, or if you want to take the platform and do something yourself, we certainly do allow that, encourage that. You can do as much or as little as you like with the solution. There are a number of tools built in. We're going to take a look at a couple of these during the demo, but alerting, obviously, visualization, normalizing the data, really important thing. Right? You've got data coming in from Cisco's and Palo Alto's and Fortinets and whatnot. You have maybe Active Directory, or you have Okta, or you have Cisco Duo. So even authentication can happen. Or you have Windows, or you have Mac OS, and or you have Linux. They all might say the same thing in different ways. So normalizing them to a common indexing model is a big deal. Being able to search all of that data quickly, detecting anomalies via unsupervised machine learning, all of this is part and parcel of the platform. So the stuff that I described is on the right. These are capabilities. We have dashboards of different sorts, different kinds of queries that you can use. By the way, if anybody on the call is anxious to take their fingertips out for a spin on our platform, if you are our customer, you have full access to do that. You can do it all. You don't have to, like I said, as much or as little as you like, but all of these capabilities are in the platform, which the SOC uses, our SOC uses, in order to deliver stuff to you. First of all, a priority one incident. We see something, that 15-minute boundary kicks in. We got to tell you, and preferably tell you with the 5 W's. The 5 W's are who, what, when, where, and what should you do about it. No point tapping you on the shoulder and saying bad things are going on. We got to be specific, absent which, how can we expect you to act? Of course, sometimes it's a trend. Sometimes it's a critical observation. Sometimes it's something that we're suspicious about. So all of these deliverables from a threat perspective come to you from the SOC. By the way, how do they come? Depends on your preference. So however it is, you like to see a ticket, you'd like to see an email, whatever your contact tree is, we follow that process in order to notify you. So let me show you, and I'm going to flip over to a demo. I hope you can see my browser. I'm logged into, or I am logging into a test instance, and I wanted to show you some of the tools that are available within the OpenXDR platform for a threat hunter. The first one I'm going to show you is our mapping to the attack framework. By the way, if you're not familiar with this framework, this is your tax dollars at work. The MITRE Corporation, which is funded by the US government, has developed an excellent body of knowledge, which is essentially an encyclopedia of attack techniques. They've been observing attackers, and they've been classifying the techniques that they use to attack for a very long time. And this has become the de facto standard in the security industry for some years now. We've adopted this. It's a nomenclature. It's a way of communicating such that everyone has the same word for what is it that has happened. It allows good interaction between teams. You don't have to say anything more. If you refer to a particular MITRE technique name, what it means is universally understood. So this is something that we've adopted. We've taken all of the things that we do and normalized them to this particular framework because we find it so useful. By the way, I narrowed down, if you were watching, on one particular group. If you're an MSP, then this may be one of your customers. If you're an enterprise, this may be one of your locations or one of your teams, however it is that you're logically organized. And I'm choosing to see data for the last 1 day. And what I see is that there are a number of observations that have occurred in this enterprise. The size, by the way, depends upon how many. So the bigger the circle, the more. The smaller the circle, the lesser. And what this is saying is that data has been observed in this enterprise, which matches these attack techniques that are described and known to the attack framework, right? So you can see that at FirmTech, there have been some techniques around their Office 365, some around their AWS implementation, some on a workstation, on a domain controller, and so on. If you go down this, you can see it on a timeline. And if I wanted to narrow down to one particular time, so I see that there's a lot of activity that has occurred here, I'm going to try to shrink this and take a look. Now, what is it that has happened? At 3:06 a.m., you can see that there has been this, this method that has occurred on workstation 5. Registry run keys in the startup folder has been changed. The attack framework tells us that this can be the act of an attacker. It doesn't have to be. It can be normal too. But attackers have been known to do this. And then as we go down the line, we see that he's done, other kinds of things, listing of other systems, IP address, he's at 312, he's gone and done these kinds of things within an environment, and then bypass user account control by 315. He's abusing commands possibly and script interpreters. And all of this is going on until about 3:24 in the morning, where he's encoded data. And now within FirmTech, the game has shifted to some other machine. Now he's looking at domain controller 1, and you've got file deletion occurring. You've got preventing the corrupted system from recovering, right? By the way, here are the rules that got triggered. We didn't know that this stuff was going to happen. What did we do? Well, the platform went and looked at all of the data and classified it in terms of the attack framework. This is to allow a threat hunter, could be one of the people on our team, could be you if you're interested in this kind of thing, can come in and take a look at this, and you can look at all of these rules, look at all of these techniques, and try and identify what might be going on. By the way, if you're familiar with attack, then this particular display, this matrix, is something that might be more common to you, more familiar to you. You can look, for example, at bits jobs, right? And so tell me again, what is the technique? So here is the reference in the encyclopedia. What's a bits job? Well, this is a framework, background intelligence transfer system, that is built into Microsoft Windows, and an adversary might abuse bits jobs to execute malicious payloads. And here are all of the different examples, and here are different kinds of campaigns. Cobalt Strike uses it, Leviathan uses it, MITRE ATT&CK uses it. So these are campaigns, attack campaigns, that the MITRE Corporation knows have used this technique, which is why, of course, it has made it into the library. But perish the thought, is this occurring in my network? Really? I want to know where. So you can now launch the log search, and you can see that these bits jobs have been kicked off on 3 machines. They've been kicked off by a service called the RPatch service. I could take a look, expand this. This is what our SOC would do. This is what you could do if you are so inclined, because you have the access. And you can see that there is a transfer that has occurred of a particular executable. Now, this is simple and easy to catch. This is a demo system after all. By the way, you can pivot from this. So if you, for example, wanted to say, yeah, I see this, I wonder what the RPatch service has done. Simply click here, and now you pivot. This is the capability of the system. Now you can see that the RPatch service has been running on all of these machines. It's done some process creation, right? And you can look to see, for example, what sorts of applications has it run. And you see it running a variety of applications, one of which is the nefarious PS-exec. If you're a threat hunter, you know what this means. This is a very popular, really powerful tool, which is commonly abused by attackers everywhere. If they can launch this bad boy, why, they can do all kinds of mayhem, especially if they have credentials in your network. Sit in one place, distribute malware remotely all across the enterprise. What's this thing doing? You can see that it is running, accepting the EULA, and running as the RPatch service, and it's distributing this kind of thing. So this is a really big problem. Now, of course, this might be an atomic alert, and you might have caught it, as an individual thing. But what MITRE is doing, or the attack framework is doing, is allowing you to see this in context. So this is some weaponry that is in the NetSurian Open XDR platform that is available to our analysts, available to you if that is something that you like. Second thing that I wanted to illustrate for you is machine learning. So we receive a really large amount of data into the system, and it is simply not possible for our SOC. By the way, we're processing 16 billion events every day from across our customer base. No matter how many people we have in the SOC, you know that we could never look at any of that, in any kind of manual way. So we have to have the platform actually look, preferably through unsupervised machine learning, and detect anomaly. So I'm going to look at something, for example, PowerShell launched a new child process. We know that this is a popular attack vector these days. And I'm just showing you the job that is running in the background all the time. You don't have to worry about this. This is built into the solution. Our analysts, our team keeps updating this all day long. I'm just simply showing it to you as an illustration of the power of the platform that is being leveraged on your behalf to perform threat hunting. So what are we doing here? We're actually trying to understand that when PowerShell runs at one of your endpoints, by the way, built into Windows, therefore it's living off the land kind of technique, we want to know what that child process is that got launched, and we want it sorted by computer so that we can see, and we want to know if this has, if this has occurred. So this is the job that is running, for example, in the background all the time. Well, our team, or you, if you're so inclined, can decide that you want to look at the results of this model, and I'm doing it for the last one day, and try and identify what sorts of processes did PowerShell launch. Well, sometimes it's normal stuff. You see con host. This happens all day long, right? This is very normal and regular inside a Windows environment. But Mimikatz, really? You know that Mimikatz, if you're a threat hunter, you know that this is as evil gets. So guess what? PowerShell actually launched Mimikatz somewhere. Where did it launch? It launched here on Acme Web Server and McDowell's Jump Box. By the way, I'm an MSP in this environment. So Acme happens to be one of my customers. McDowell's happens to be another customer of mine. I've logged in as the all-seeing admin. So I can see these threats across all enterprise, all of the different customers of mine. I might want to investigate this further, and I can surely do that by performing a log search and then taking this, to the next level. But I just wanted to give you a sense that these are the capabilities in the product. So what problems must you solve? Well, you must certainly get data. Having gotten it, you have to have people that are familiar with how to perform threat hunting. And whatever the heck platform you've got, ours or anyone else's, hopefully you've got enough instrumentation in there, enough integration with threat feeds in there, such that you can not only identify early on, but then once you see something, you can chase it down left, right, up, down. Don't be surprised if you're a threat hunter, 90% of what you think is a problem turns out to be nothing. I mean, the most common thing that you see, that you catch on a daily basis, is misconfiguration. You catch something, it is wrong, it shouldn't have happened, but it isn't malicious. It's somebody has not configured something the right kind of way. From an incident response perspective, I've heard it described this way. A lot of the stuff, 90% or better, is cleanup on aisle 5. Right? You show up after the spill has occurred with a mop and a bucket, and you're cleaning up to see what is it that has occurred. Once in a while, you're actually running to catch the crook as he's trying to get away. And even more rarely, you're the eye in the sky. You're prowling as the hawk on high, and you can see that something's going to go down. You see them, walking up to the store with their guns. And so therefore you can actually prevent that kind of thing. But that's the nature of threat hunting. In your wildest dreams, you're really working against George Clooney and his crew in Ocean 11. But that does not happen on an everyday basis. The everyday life is really, in fact, quite much more mundane. So that's what I wanted to say about threat hunting. One more slide to show you before we get to the Q&A. So I wanted to mention that our SOC has been in continuous operation since 2016. We're processing at our US data center about 16 billion events. Only last year, it was around 8 to 12 billion. So it's ramping up at a high volume as we add customers and as customers have more data. There are more than 100 people in our SOC operating in the different areas. As I mentioned, if you want to do this, you have to be thinking about threat hunting, of course, but then also SOC engineering, also onboarding, also talking to the customer, and also project management. So all of these functions, 100 plus people in our SOC. So with that, I am happy to take questions.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ananth. As he mentioned, we're going to move into questions now. We've had a number of questions come in. If you'd like to submit a question, please enter them into the chat or questions tab now so that we can get to as many as possible. So we're actually going to start off with this one, Ananth. We're curious, do any compliance mandates require threat hunting?
So compliance mandates, and we're talking about things like PCI DSS, or we're talking about GDPR, or we're talking about HIPAA. These mandates are really about two things. One is hygiene, and the other is some type of security best practice in terms of configuration. So typically they will not mandate threat hunting. That's threat hunting is a higher level when you've decided, because compliance is not security, right? Just because you're compliant, and indeed, if you look at the stories of hacks that are occurring in the enterprise, there are a number of them, and every single one of them were probably compliant, probably even audited and found compliant. So security and compliance are not really the same thing at all. So does compliance mandate threat hunting? It does not, but compliance is the least common denominator. It's the absolute minimum that you must do. Maybe that's what your insurance company wants. Maybe that's what the credit card company wants, absent which they'll give you a higher rate because you're a bigger risk. But they don't mandate threat hunting. If you're thinking about threat hunting, then you're thinking about going above and beyond the basic requirements of compliance.
That sounds great. Thank you for that. Kind of leading into that, another question we received is, isn't threat hunting really the same thing as incident response?
So threat hunting is before, incident response is after. So they're really not the same thing. If your threat hunting or your alerting throws up something that needs to be examined, that's actually an incident, and now you need to think about how to respond. So the two are back-to-back, threat hunting first, and if you find something, then you have to actually do something. That's what incident response is all about. So no, they're not really the same thing at all, but they are right next to each other in terms of activity. They usually require similar but not same kind of skills. So if a threat is detected, then it's typically handed off to somebody in IT with specific directions. I talked about the 5 Ws. You detect a threat, you should escalate this to someone to respond, but to tell them specifically what they need to respond or how they need to respond. If for example, you simply say bad things are going on in your network, that's clueless. How am I supposed to react? On the other hand, if you said user John has plugged in a workstation, plugged in a USB to workstation 3 on the 3rd floor, and malware has jumped from the USB onto the endpoint and is now communicating to China, and it's known to be part of this campaign, you need to go there, disconnect that USB, quarantine that workstation, and then maybe re-image it. That's 5 Ws. You've said who, John, you've said where, workstation 3 on the 3rd floor, you've said when, going on right now, you said what, USB plugged in and jumped onto the thing, you said what specifically am I supposed to do? Isolate that endpoint, go and re-image it, send John to Siberia for re-education. So you've provided sufficient info. You can now respond to that incident, or an IT person can respond to the incident. So yes, they are allied, but they are different. Incident response is different than threat hunting. Megan?
Perfect. Thank you, Ananth. Another question we just got is, do you recommend any threat hunting training or certification?
So yes, there are a number so first of all, we're talking about blue team and not red team, right? So the difference, blue team is largely defensive. They're trying to identify what's going on. They're trying to prevent the network from being compromised. Red team is about attacking. So there are offensive security techniques that you can use to go back and launch it back in their face. Typically, that's not something that we're able to do because attribution is very difficult. We know we're being attacked, but we can't really tell you with great certainty exactly who is attacking, such that you can actually take action against them. So there are a number of training regimes that are available, both through CompTIA, but also especially the SANS organization. There are courses on digital forensics and incident response, so-called DFIR. We ourselves do run a training component because it's important for us, but that's something that we do for our internal staff. If you happen to be our customer, we're happy to train you on how to use our solution, how to use the tool set. But how do you become a threat hunter? Well, that is something you do by some amount of training and a lot of elbow grease. You got to practice, 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 practice. Think of it like, driving. You could go to driving school. You could get yelled at by your dad and told how to drive. But what makes you a good driver is practice. You got to get out there in the rain, the sleet, the snow, in the interstate, on the local highways, in the nighttime with, the 16-wheeler, 18-wheeler right next to you, in the blinding rain. And when you've done that over a long period of time, why then you can be considered to be a good driver. Same for threat hunting.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ananth. We'll probably get to one more question. So if you have anything striking, you can put them in the chat. But one other one we got is, why isn't automated or AI-led threat hunting, is that cheaper or better? What are your thoughts on that?
We see AI as a force multiplier for the human. We don't see it as a replacement. Why? Well, because there is a lot of nuance and a lot of variation that the commercial UI that you can apply, in a reasonable organization. I'm not talking about the U.S. government, not talking about almighty Google. They might have, an entire country and an entire set of data centers dedicated to just AI. But for your typical network, the kind of computing power that's available doesn't lend itself to having AI, even if you believe that can all be gotten in AWS or Azure. That's still actually quite limited compared to the scope of the problem. So is AI threat hunting bad? No, it isn't bad. And indeed, we use it. As I mentioned, we're processing 16 billion events a day. So certainly we're using machine learning in order to trigger some anomaly detection, which our human analysts can actually pursue. But can we give it all up such that we can be the Maytag repairman and the system, the AI can do it all? Not yet at that stage. The industry is not. But definitely AI is the wave of the future. And just like you see in the cars, right now, even the most pedestrian car will do lane keeping. It will do adaptive cruise control, whereas maybe 10 years ago, only the fancy ones do it. Now, some cars will actually parallel park themselves, right? So that is coming steadily to us all. And some if you're participating in the new Tesla beta, it'll actually drive itself as long as you're on a well-marked highway with proper lanes and you've identified the start and the end point. Still have to take over when you get to the exit off of the highway, but it can relieve a lot of tedium. This didn't used to be the case 5 years ago. That is occurring in our industry as well, and AI is steadily taking away a lot of the grunt work, a lot of the hard job, a lot of the repetitive work. And so you definitely need to use it. It has a place, but it is not a replacement yet. If you live long enough, maybe you'll see that come to pass in your lifetime, but not today. Megan?
Yeah, thanks so much. We'll do one more question. Ananth, how do threat intelligence and threat hunting go hand in hand?
So, two different things. You need threat intelligence in order to perform hunting. Many times, or most often. And that threat intelligence, by the way, can be found at the organization or the network level too. So, for example, if you're identifying baselines, there's a user John, and he does these sorts of things on a regular basis. You've developed a baseline. That is intelligence about what is normal inside the environment. And of course, John in customer A is not the same John in customer B. But there is also intelligence that comes to you from the outside, either observed in the community or observed in the big I internet. There are lots of feeds that are showing you all of these sorts of things on a regular basis. So you need threat intelligence because you're going to see something, and you're going to try to identify whether it is evil, yes or no. And that requires you to perform lookups in these threat databases, which hopefully you've got available to you. So threat intelligence is a essential component of threat hunting. You have to have it, and you have to have it in sufficiently fast and sufficiently varied volume such that you can use it effectively against observations you're making in your local network to identify when there's evil. So they do go hand in hand, but they're not the same thing.
Great. Thank you, Ananth. Well, that's all the time we have today. Thank you again to Ananth, and thank you everyone for joining us. We will see you next time. If you have any questions about what we went over, please feel free to connect with us anytime at info@netshurian.com. But we hope this talk was insightful, and we hope you have a great rest of your day and week. Thanks so much.